Welcome to British Focus. Today, I invite you to consider a narrative that, on the surface, appears to be a grand tale of international diplomacy but ultimately exposes a disconcerting display of weakness and miscalculation. The much-hyped visit to Washington by Sir Keir Starmer was intended to be a masterstroke, a bid to solidify UK-US relations, secure vital trade agreements, and project the image of our leader as a formidable global statesman. Yet, behind the gleaming press releases and carefully rehearsed public statements, the reality emerges as nothing short of disastrous, prompting many to question not only the competence of our leadership but also the future direction of our national interests. Let us examine the situation with a critical eye. The narrative we are presented with suggests that the visit was part of a broader European charm offensive, one designed to win the favor of US President Donald Trump. However, insiders have revealed that what was meant to be a display of strategic finesse quickly morphed into an embarrassing exhibition of naivety. According to these accounts, Starmer stumbled through pivotal discussions, unable to mount a robust defense against Trump's aggressive policies, and ultimately failed to secure any tangible gains for Britain. Is this the standard we have come to expect from those who purport to represent our national interests on the world stage? It is posited that the visit resulted in a superficially improved personal relationship between Sir Keir Starmer and President Trump, a relationship that some within Number 10 dismiss as mere political spin. The narrative goes on to detail a series of concessions, commitments to NATO, the prospect of a trade deal to protect the UK from tariffs, and even the President's tentative approval of a controversial agreement concerning the Chagos Islands. Yet, one cannot help but ask at what cost these concessions were achieved. The accounts suggest that Starmer's eagerness to please led him to yield critical ground, effectively surrendering British interests in the process. This raises an alarming question for all of us. Can we afford to have our national dignity compromised for the sake of a fleeting personal rapport with a leader whose commitments are, by all accounts, notoriously unpredictable? In the weeks leading up to the visit, there was much talk of meticulous planning and strategic groundwork. We hear that Starmer, even before his time in opposition had ended, had reached out to President Trump following an assassination attempt, while his foreign secretary labored to forge ties with influential figures like Vice President J.D. Vance. These efforts, however, seem to have evaporated under the crushing weight of Trump's cutthroat approach to negotiations. The meticulous scenario planning that had been undertaken to ensure a favorable outcome appears, in hindsight, to have been nothing more than a desperate gambit, a gamble that ultimately saw our leader overwhelmed by external pressures and internal miscalculations. Critics are particularly vocal about Starmer's reluctance to challenge Trump publicly. Ever since a dinner at Trump Tower in September, our leader has maintained a careful silence, deliberately avoiding any form of personal or public criticism of the president. This strategic silence, intended as a means to preserve diplomatic niceties, is now being interpreted as an admission of defeat, a clear indication that Starmer is willing to sacrifice British values and global leadership in favor of a superficial alliance. How can we, as a nation, be confident in the future of our international standing when our representative seems more preoccupied with securing a warm personal relationship than with upholding the principled stance our country so desperately needs? The narrative does not stop there. We are told that despite assurances of trade advantages and strengthened defense commitments, the benefits of this Washington trip remain dubious at best. There is an underlying skepticism about whether these promises will hold any water, given President Trump's notorious tendency to renege on his word. The idea that a personal connection and soft power could substitute for robust, uncompromising negotiation is a dangerous one, a notion that undermines the very fabric of diplomatic engagement. After all, what is the worth of an alliance if it is built on the shifting sands of personal affection rather than on the bedrock of concrete, strategic gains? Moreover, the narrative draws attention to a particularly theatrical moment, a personal letter retrieved by Starmer from his jacket, a letter penned by the King, inviting President Trump for a second state visit. Intended as a grand diplomatic overture, this gesture has instead been widely condemned as yet another example of the UK bending over backwards to win favor. While Trump may have expressed delight at reading the letter, it hardly matters if such expressions of personal admiration come at the expense of our nation's sovereignty and strategic autonomy. One must wonder if this is the kind of diplomacy that will secure our country's future, or if it merely serves to embarrass us on the global stage. The decision to raise defense spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, hailed by some on Capitol Hill, has also not escaped criticism at home. Many argue that this move, rather than being a well-considered adjustment to our strategic priorities, is nothing more than a concession to US demands. When coupled with the contentious agreement to transfer sovereignty over the Chagos Islands, a decision that has sparked widespread outrage among those who see it as a betrayal of national interests, the overall picture is one of a leadership that is too eager to compromise. It is a stark reminder that in the realm of international diplomacy, every concession has a cost, and in this instance, that cost may be the very essence of British pride and independence. As we consider these events, it becomes clear that this episode is not merely about a single failed diplomatic mission. It is a microcosm of a broader crisis of leadership. The narrative forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality, that the strategies employed by our leaders may be increasingly out of step with the principles and interests of the nation they serve. It compels us to ask whether a focus on charm and personal relationships can ever substitute for the hard, uncompromising work of defending our national interests on the world stage. For many in Britain, the answer is a resounding no. The notion that the UK's future can be secured by placating a volatile foreign leader with empty gestures and hollow promises is not only naive, it is dangerous. In engaging with this critical analysis, I encourage you to reflect on the fundamental question at the heart of this narrative. What do we, as citizens, truly need from our leaders? Is it enough to maintain a facade of amicable relations, or must we demand a more robust, principled approach to diplomacy? One that does not compromise our core values in the pursuit of short-term gains? The unfolding story of Sir Keir Starmer's Washington visit is a cautionary tale, one that lays bare the perilous consequences of an approach that prioritizes appeasement over assertiveness. It is a stark reminder that in an ever-changing global landscape, the price of weakness can be nothing short of national jeopardy, leaving Britain vulnerable at a time when we can ill afford it. As you ponder these reflections, consider the broader implications of a leadership style that appears more focused on personal warmth than on safeguarding our country's long-term strategic interests. The legacy of this misadventure may well shape our future in ways that extend far beyond the immediate fallout of a single diplomatic failure. Rather than celebrating a superficial victory, we must scrutinize the real cost of such concessions and ask ourselves whether this is the path we wish to follow as a nation. Before the talks, the President had stated that he held a great affection for the United Kingdom, a sentiment that at first blush might seem reassuring. Yet, as we examine the aftermath of these negotiations, it becomes painfully apparent that affectionate words mean nothing when the actual outcome sees the UK coming out on the losing end. I invite you to ponder this with me. When promises of support and camaraderie are all that is offered, can any nation truly stand secure in its interests? The stark reality is that while Europe was in desperate need of assurance that the United States would stand behind Ukraine, our Prime Minister had yet to receive any such certainty from Trump during their meeting. This lack of clarity has sent shock waves through Europe, leaving Britain in a dangerously vulnerable position. A situation that, quite frankly, should trouble every one of us who cares about our nation's future. Sir Keir Starmer entered these talks with the hopeful ambition of strengthening his position on the world stage. Instead, he emerged as a figure whose credibility has been severely undermined. It is deeply concerning to observe a leader who once inspired confidence now reduced to a state of disarray. As we reflect on the events, we must ask ourselves, how did it come to this? Was it an overestimation of personal charm, an underestimation of the formidable force that is Trump, or a miscalculation that has left the UK teetering on the brink of diplomatic isolation? The answer, I fear, is a combination of all these factors. Consider the irony of the situation. Before the talks, Trump declared his affection for the UK, a gesture meant to foster goodwill and mutual respect. Yet, those affectionate words, so freely given, have proven to be nothing more than empty rhetoric. They have not translated into any substantial or tangible gains for our nation. Instead, we are left grappling with the fallout of a failed negotiation, with our strategic interests seemingly bartered away for fleeting personal sentiment. For many of us, it is a bitter reminder that in international relations, soft words cannot replace hard-nosed negotiation. The shockwaves of this debacle have not been confined to the halls of power in Washington. They have reverberated throughout Europe. The absence of any clear commitment from Trump regarding support for Ukraine has left European leaders uneasy and uncertain. This ambiguity not only undermines confidence in transatlantic alliances but also exposes the UK to risks that, until now, may have been underestimated. As you listen to these developments, you might well wonder whether our nation's future is being sacrificed at the altar of appeasement and political expediency. What is perhaps most disconcerting is the perception that Starmer entered these talks with lofty expectations, only to have his credibility reduced to tat. This is not merely a case of a diplomatic misstep. It is a profound indication that the current leadership is out of its depth. The gathering of President Zelensky and European leaders this coming Sunday, an attempt to salvage what remains of Starmer's reputation, will undoubtedly be a critical juncture. It is a moment that forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth. When a leader fails to assert the national interest, when concessions are made without securing real benefits, the consequences can be catastrophic. The situation is further compounded by internal political strife. In less than a year, Starmer has seen the resignation of a fourth minister, a sobering statistic that reflects deep divisions within his own government. The resignation of former Conservative Deputy Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitchell, who once lauded a Labour MP for her integrity and strong principles, is emblematic of the profound disillusionment that now permeates the corridors of power. International Development Minister Annalise Dodds, whose unexpected departure from the government was a direct response to Starmer's decision to drastically cut the UK's foreign aid budget, has added her voice to the chorus of dissent. Dodds, with her measured warnings that such cuts would inadvertently strengthen Russia's position, has contradicted the Prime Minister's claim that these funds would be repurposed for enhancing defence spending and countering authoritarian regimes like that of Vladimir Putin. Her resignation is not an isolated incident. It is the fourth instance of a minister with cabinet responsibilities leaving since Starmer assumed office last summer. In her resignation letter, she laid bare the harsh reality that it was now unfeasible for him to uphold his commitments under the current policy framework. This cascade of resignations, these high-profile departures, signals a crisis of confidence from within the government itself. It is an unmistakable sign that the internal consensus on Starmer's strategy has fractured. One must ask, with a measure of skepticism, whether the current approach, marked by a reluctance to challenge, a dependence on the goodwill of foreign leaders, and a willingness to compromise on core principles, is sustainable in the long run. The implications are severe. When ministers, individuals who have dedicated their careers to public service and national interest, choose to abandon ship, it is a clarion call that the prevailing strategy is not only flawed but fundamentally dangerous. I urge you, as concerned citizens and keen observers of international politics, to critically evaluate these events. The failure to secure meaningful assurances from the United States, the mismanagement of vital negotiations, and the internal political fallout all point to a leadership that is struggling to navigate a rapidly changing global landscape. We are at a crossroads where the decisions made today will determine whether Britain can continue to assert its influence on the world stage or whether it will be relegated to a position of weakness and dependency. As we reflect on the gravity of this situation, let us not be passive bystanders. Engage with the discourse, question the narratives presented by those in power, and demand accountability. The stakes are simply too high for complacency. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that our nation is not led into a future where diplomatic missteps and internal divisions undermine the very foundations of our sovereignty. Thank you for joining me in this critical examination of our current predicament. Your engagement and vigilance are vital as we navigate these challenging times. Goodbye for now.